Hello and welcome back to AdMasters 2.0 Gaming Edition, a fireside chat series with gaming industry leaders sharing their knowledge on what it takes to build and promote best-in-class mobile games. My name is Katya and I am leading App Ads Marketing at Google EMEA and will be your host for today's conversation. Talent management is a cornerstone or a stumbling block for growth and success, and yet it is often overseen. Today we're joined by Felipe de Rose, Chief Growth Officer of Traplight Games, to talk about taking your company to the next level through recruitment, motivation, and retention of top caliber candidates. Stay tuned. Without further ado, let me introduce you to Felipe. So Felipe, do you mind telling us about yourself, what attracted you to gaming industry and kept you there for all this time? And also talk to us about your role as a Chief Growth Officer.
Thank you for the invitation. What attracts me to gaming in general is it's healthy entertainment that doesn't, require any special condition because you can do it for free. So it's accessible to many, many, many people, and that's great. Obviously, it was a childhood dream a little bit, and as chief growth at Traplight, which is funny, it's just a job title really. It's nothing special. The most special thing is to literally be surrounded by some great people and some of the top people in our space to do certain things, and those things include UA, AdMob, analytics, community support, and creative as well. And obviously, I also work directly with the founders of the company, and it's great fun.
What are the biggest growing pains of a gaming company, internal and external, and what are you doing to solve these problems?
Growth is tendentially a fairly capital-intensive activity. So you do need to find that capital either through making other games or raising funds, etc. We're not having a session about fundraising, but that is heavy in terms of the psychology as well, because you have to think about cash flow and paying the bills and paying salaries. So you can't just sort of spend all your money on marketing and then expect it to all come back and then some to cover everything. There is obviously a lot of competition. The barriers to entry are very low, but the barriers to success are very high. So nowadays, if you want to be a sort of a top 100 globally, you need to spend quite a bit to meet a certain quality bar. There is, of course, certain parts of the industry that continue launching games regularly and make pretty sort of standardized games. But that's a different kind of business model, heavily reliant on ad revenues. And anyway, just to have that machine well-oiled and launching those games regularly, like hyper casual, I mean, you still need to incur some costs. So it's not just a question of, having just purely high quality, expensive products, but also just keep launching things regularly. So production costs are definitely getting higher if you want to be at the top and stay at the top.
In your view, what are the things that make Traplight attractive as an employer, and what are the universal things that you would recommend the companies to take into account when they're doing their hiring?
In general, we want to hire people who don't agree with us. We want some perspective, some insight, right? Because feedback is always a gift, as long as it's not like, personal, but it's business, then it's very constructive to have differing points of views. It comes down to the team leads and the general leadership, that you have, strong values that those leaders respect, and that ensure everything stays very constructive and very motivating. So we've developed a set of values to focus on, staying positive and staying constructive, and work through challenges and get over the hump.
So when you're hiring, do you go for attitude or do you go for skills?
Skills really can be taught, especially in a space where skills change fairly rapidly, but attitude and personality, that's more something you're born with. I think there's definitely a stronger reliance on attitude, especially obviously if it's a coding job, you need to have a certain minimum amount of skills. But if for example you're looking for somebody in data or server engineering, and everything you have is in Google Cloud Platform, and you found an incredible positive attitude person that is only an expert of AWS, usually the questions are focused on understanding whether they can easily learn on Google Cloud Platform, and normally it's fine. But attitude is important, especially at the beginning, because really the first 50 hires in a company are what set the culture. They set the stage. So they're pretty important hires, because if you get a bad apple when there's only like 10, 20, 30 people, that can be pretty bad. Much worse than in a 10,000 people company. You hire a bad apple, you don't even notice. Or there are checks and balances to notice these problems, but really it's super important to get the recruitment as good as you can, to ensure there's a foundation to the company culture being developed solidly, and not just add people because they're the best in class and they're the best in the industry, the most famous, the most blogged about, or things like that, because then it just becomes, it may ruin the company culture, but it also becomes just a cluster of type A personalities all together in the same room, and that can be problematic to manage sometimes.
How do you manage natural attrition? So of course people move in the industry. How are you trying to mitigate that? And maybe if you do spot a bad apple, how do you go about it?
Attrition, you mean people leaving?
People leaving, right? So I guess there are two questions in one. How do you mitigate people leaving? If you see signs of somebody about to churn, what are your thoughts, or how do you prevent that? And then if you actively spot somebody on the team not on par with what you want, how do you deal with that?
If somebody's checked out, right? If somebody's just a bit like in human relationships, they're not connected anymore and they're on a different path, I think it's better out than in, to be honest with you. Not worth the effort just because they are, the best in class of what they do, to like push them to stay in. It's better gone, because they want to break up, and they may not have the courage to do so, but the dating is over, and it's time to move on. So that, because again, it can be a problem to have everyone working at a certain pace and doing things enthusiastically, and then have somebody that is sort of checked out. There can obviously be personal reasons for being checked out and whatnot, and usually that is the case. And normally taking some time off should fix the problem, really. But if they've just lost interest and they're getting tempted by something very attractive outside, then it's a very tough uphill battle to avoid that. Fortunately, I think we've only had that happen twice or something along those lines since before I even started. Since I started, no one left. So that's a very positive sign of the culture that we've built so far. And the company obviously went through a stage of just purely developing games to actually running them full time. So it's good to see that people went through that transition. If you have a bad apple, normally you need to understand whether it's a bad apple in terms of skills or in terms of an attitude issue or personality issue. Or it could be a bit of both. And typically having, honest feedback sessions and discussing things further normally resolves most challenges. If absolutely necessary, then you construct something that goes along the lines of a personal improvement plan of just training or learning a set of skills, because that can be motivating for a lot of people to kind of go back to school type thing, or allow people to say I prefer this role instead of that role because they've been on that role for too long. So normally if your recruitment is decent enough, it's hard to just actually hire a bad apple just like that. If people become a bad apple, then normally there is, most of the times, of personal reasons, but sometimes it's professional reasons, like I'd like to sort of shift role and do something else. And that normally can be accommodated. If it can't be accommodated, then yeah, I mean, if you've run out of options, you have to go down a harder path. But there's always something important, relevant to do in a smaller setting. And if it's got enough priority, then you can reallocate resources so that, you can retain the talent.
Actually, something interesting you mentioned. So coming back to that recruitment phase, what's an ideal candidate when you interview somebody for whatever role? Like, what is an ideal candidate for Traplight games, and any tips on building the recruitment process that is robust against, helps you prevent the bad apples while selecting the best people for your company?
Typically in smaller realities, we always hire friends and friends of friends. And I always like to say, you don't normally always choose as travel companion just to go visit a place, your friends or your best friends, right? Because, you like to wake up early and your friend likes to sleep in. And so sometimes friends are not the best to go traveling. And just by the same token, friends are not the best to work with either. Obviously, there's an element of trust. So it's a good filter, but we certainly would want to talk to the friends of the friends and make them go through some selection, particularly with more technical roles. You want to have a more careful examination. What's really important is, as you go through these steps, it's not so much the quantity of questions that you ask, but trying to see the sort of behavior that they manifest through every motion there. Are they showing interest? Are they, one of the little tricks sometimes is send a homework and don't give a deadline and see what happens. If they ask for a deadline, or they just do it immediately as fast as possible and they come back the next day, Little things like that are normally clear indicators, you know, of like motivations. The quality and quantity of questions, those are very helpful. Normally people are quite used to answering them, even more junior people. You know, people are well trained at school now to go through an interview process. You can't make the process too long, you know, with too many meetings or too many homeworks or too many dinners, because then that has a negative effect. You either lose somebody because they get poached, or the expectation level goes too high. You know, if you grilled somebody for a month, then they turn around and say, well, you know, you've been asking me so much, you know, I expect this much pay, you know. So you have to find a sweeter balance to ensure that you don't, you know, nauseate somebody before even getting together. So it's a bit tricky sometimes.
What's Traplight's philosophy when it comes to that? How do you make sure that you hire inclusively, you build inclusive games, you cater to different audiences of players? Any thoughts on that?
I think the most important basic concept is you don't hire, you know, diversity for the sake of hiring diversity. That's pretty bad. It sends the wrong message. But I think it's very underestimated in general that, you know, historically we come from an industry in the past 70s and 80s, which obviously was pretty male dominated, and some would argue the entire world was male dominated back then. But it was more of a gadget, of a geeky subject, and it isn't anymore. It simply isn't. I can't have a geeky conversation about mobile games. I can still have occasionally with some friends a geeky conversation about certain console games or PC games. But generally speaking, mobile games have gone so far and wide that it's on everyone's lips, right? And that's great. That's made the business so much more interesting and so much more high potential, and the ubiquitousness has made it very competitive, but also great possibilities, great opportunities. Because the consumers have so radically changed, they're not just a bunch of guys playing games on a console or on their PC, but it's everyone playing games on their phone. Then obviously we have to consider that when we're making these ubiquitous consumer products, we can't just sort of make them with us in mind, just thinking about the guys, you know. And so, but it's so much better to have enough diversity, or as much diversity as possible, right from the start, because it can really influence in the right direction the product.
But how do you keep the team motivated?
Yeah.
And that's especially important now that we're remote and it's not the same as being in the office.
Yeah, definitely. We went through a very important process as we grew of setting very simple core values, right, on which we can build kind of our vision, but also our style of working. And concretely, we can work on our OKRs. And, you know, OKRs are never perfect, and they're never an easy thing, but the hardest part is getting started on them and practicing and accepting that they will never be perfect at the first go. The notion of having that or some form of KPI tracking or progression tracking is actually really important for people not to understand that they will get punished if they meet those things. That's a very bad way of looking at them. But that, you know, if you do this, it's good, and keep doing what is good, right? So keep following this path. It's sort of positive affirmation, positive confirmation. And if there is a reward at the end of it, you know, that's great. It's part of, people don't work for the glory. They also work for some reward, which could be monetary or could be, win a TV or whatever it is. So it's motivating to see a path and to see where you're headed and to get confirmation that positive confirmation from the outside and in the company that you are on the right track and that there is a goal in sight. Sometimes it's difficult to do that if you're not seeing numbers yet, or you're still kind of in soft launch, or, it's difficult to find that motivation. But if you have a path to follow, because it's very easy to get demotivated by the simple fact that, we have a ton of things to do, let's just do all of them as fast as possible and get rid of them. No, because there's always going to be something else to do. Tomorrow is another day. What matters is what are our top priorities, what do our OKRs tell us, and what is the path we should all be following together. And there is motivation if you like what you're doing and you're all together on the same boat. That can be very motivating. Rowing together in the same direction can be very motivating. And of course, money is part of it and bonuses are a part of it. But just fighting the good fight together or rowing in the same boat is always very motivating.
According to the OKRs, if the goal is achieved only 70%, do people feel happy having achieved this result, or does it demotivate them because they think, well, I was kind of aiming at 100?
This is entirely subjective to the company. Whatever works best for you. Some of our teams have decided that it's better to think of completion 70% and stretch goal as 100%. It's not a rule. It's not set in stone. OKRs are really something that you need to keep practicing and see to what works for which team, because they have to serve that team lead's leadership functions, basically. They don't have to be kind of a standard set of rules for the whole company and that's it. Obviously, some things have to be standardized if you tie financial goals to them, but you really have to get everybody's buy-in. So it's not like, well, the rule says 70% or 100%, so we should go this way. No, like, what is everyone willing to accept? Because ultimately, it's your team leaders which have to enforce, if you will, the OKRs. So they can't just sort of enforce a rule they don't understand, So there is no set in stone rule for this. It really depends on.
Are you sharing company results like revenue, stats, some other information that is correlated to OKRs? Like, do you practice all hands or full sort of transparency across the company?
Yeah, we have all hands every week. We are 100% transparent on revenues, on profit, loss, everything. I think the only thing we're not transparent about is salaries, but that's a cultural thing, I think, more than anything else, and it's always sensitive. So I think that's but I don't think that really matters, as such. But every other KPI is shared very openly, and everyone can access it very openly. And that's quite important, because there shouldn't be, it's not a question of keeping secrets. It's a question that with that level of honesty comes a strong level of trust. And that's very important, because people should not be distracted by the notion of, am I being told the truth or not? Are they hiding something from me? That's just distractions you can't afford.
So thanks again for joining us. Thank you, Filippo.
Thank you.